Frederica Whitfield, thanks so much for joining us. More pre-debate coverage in a moment, but now to breaking news out of Charlotte, North Carolina, where anger over the shooting death of Keith Lamont Scott is spilling into the streets again today. Protesters gathered outside of Bank of America Stadium, locking arms and chanting ahead of today's game between the Carolina Panthers and the Minnesota Vikings. Today's protest comes just a day after Charlotte police released two videos showing their deadly encounter with Keith Lamont Scott. We want to warn you that some of these images are very disturbing, and one of the videos is from an officer's body camera as he arrives at the scene, and for a moment you can see Scott in the blue pants, and when he comes back into the frame, he is then on the ground. He has a blue shirt, rather. The other video is from a different perspective of a police car dash camera. And you can see Scott getting out of the car, starting to walk backwards before he was shot. Police say there are several other videos, but those are the most relevant, according to police. I want to talk more about this with retired Los Angeles Police Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey and CNN legal analyst, criminal defense attorney, and former police officer Philip Holloway. Good to see both of you. So, Cheryl, to you first. How does the release of these two videos, these images, fill in blanks for you, or perhaps leave gaping holes for you?
Well, it just really explains what the police chief had prepared us for, and that's the video is not conclusive with regards to what the officer's statements are. I don't see any furtive movements by Mr. Scott prior to them firing their weapons, and I don't see any criminal activity that was occurring based on the statement that was released yesterday that was so exigent that these officers should have left a surveillance location to drive some distance away, suit up, put on vests that say they're the police, and then come back to engage Mr. Scott. This thing could have been handled so differently. I think it would have been better had they just called a black and white, maintain their position of surveillance and cover, and allow another unit to deal with Mr. Scott. But this thing, as he's walking backwards, I don't see his hands raised. I see no furtive movement. He takes 3 steps and then he drops. It's inappropriate.
The police version of events is that he was seen in the vehicle, he was rolling marijuana blunt, and that he may have been brandishing a weapon, and that's what inspired these officers who were working undercover on another case, what inspired them to get out of their vehicles and pursue him in this manner. So, Philip, is all that justifiable in your view, based on what you saw in the videotape?
Well, let me first start by saying our sincere condolences to the Scott family, because obviously they've suffered a tragic loss. Now, that said, and as the guest has said, it's correct, we did not see any actual furtive movements in a traditional sense. However, the Supreme Court of the United States told us back in 1989 that in all police use of force situations, they are to be viewed from a perspective of objective reasonableness. In other words, put yourself in the position of the officer who is on the scene. Now, these videos don't do that. Certainly the dash cam video doesn't do that. While he's not seen raising what may be a gun in his hand, he might have been considered by the officer behind the pickup truck to be circling around behind the truck. And let's face it, police officers do not have to wait until someone starts shooting at them before they can take action to save their own life if they truly perceive that their life is in danger.
Cheryl, police say that he was brandishing a weapon. We end up seeing still images of a weapon and a holster, but not on the body of Mr. Scott. How troublesome is that?
Well, you know, listen, the Supreme Court has also told us that a black man does not have any right that a white man must respect. And so the fact that they say he's brandishing a weapon in an open carry state, and the fact that the officers are now saying that they observed him roll a joint is problematic for me, because I don't smoke marijuana and I don't roll joints, but I do know that all that activity happens in your lap. So I'm not sure how these officers were able, from their position seated in their car, to see Mr. Scott rolling a joint and then conclude that that's activity, criminal activity occurring that's so egregious and outrageous that they need to leave their post to then deal with that. It doesn't jive, Frederica.
Well, if I can just respond to that, Frederica.
Why wouldn't police release, Phil, why wouldn't police release video that substantiates a threat? Because based on what all of us are able to see, I'm not a police officer either, nor am I an attorney, but it's difficult to see where he looks like he is exhibiting threatening behavior based on the videotape that was released.
Well, that's an easy one because it's threatening behavior when you're told multiple times over 30 or 40 seconds to drop a gun, and rather than dropping the gun, you get out of your vehicle and you start maneuvering yourself into a different position.
That's at the root of this argument, though, and this is why tensions are the way they are. In the video, you do not see a weapon on this person, Mr. Scott, and that's what I mean. Why would police not reveal or show to substantiate the claim that he was brandishing a weapon, that there was a threat? Why would that video that was released not show that?
Well, the chief has told us that those videos are the best that they have.
Oh, Philip first.
Yeah, they've told us that those are the best that they have, and it's true, the videos do not, you can't clearly see what, if anything, is in his hand. It looks like there's something there. The police have said it's a gun. But we need to wait until the entire investigation is complete before we draw any firm conclusions. We can't jump to this emotional knee-jerk narrative that this was someone simply reading a book, because, you know, that has been, I think, mostly discredited at this point, not before it caused riots and the loss of life, but we have to wait until the entire investigation is complete to see what other witnesses have said that they saw, to see what the other officers have put in their report, see what other videos may or may not show. We have only seen a small piece of this, Frederica. We need to wait for it all.
Cheryl?
And so, Frederica, what we're going to find from the other officers' statements is that it's going to be very similar to what the officer who discharged his weapon is going to articulate, and that is that they were in fear, there was a threat. But we understand, Frederica, that officers will create and manufacture probable cause, reasonable suspicion, a reason to use lethal force when one does not exist. We have now been required to rely on the officer's statements to match up with the video, much like in the case of Walter Scott. Had we not had that video recording, we would have had to take the word of Michael Schlager that Walter Scott had grabbed his taser and was about to shoot him with it. But for the video in the case of Sam DuBose, we would have had to take the word of Ray Tenzing that he was being run over allegedly by Sam DuBose, and that's why he fired his weapon. And so now we're going to have to take the word of these officers that somehow Mr. Scott made a furtive movement, which we don't see. He did something threatening, which we don't see. We don't see him raising his hands, and it's going to be based on their statements and their statements alone, because great deference is given to what police officers say.
Now, that much I agree with. Great deference is given to what police officers say. Yes.
All right, we'll leave it right there.
The Supreme Court says we must do that.
Holloway.
Yeah.
All right, we'll continue this conversation. We know. All right, thank you so much, and we'll be right back.